kind of an interesting presentation. There's a European influence to this, but there's a lot of good information in here that kind of brings things home in terms of some of the technologies today being used to combat, if you will, soil compaction. So, age-old question, what is soil compaction? I'm not going to belabor a lot of points here, but one of the things they've been doing at Bern University is they've been using some imaging techniques to look at void space in soils. And so you look on the left-hand side, and the green dots, and there's kind of a cloud of them, if you will, really show the void space within the soil. Some of it's left because of root structure, some of it's just because of the natural well, I'm going to say freeze-thaw cycles in soils, but essentially what you want to end up with is about 50% void space. About 25% of that's going to be air, 25% of that's going to be moisture or water, and then the remaining portion of it's going to be the soil particles, organic matter content, and things of that nature. On the right-hand side, this is a soil that's been compacted by a traffic event, and you'll notice that the void space is considerably less, and the void space is smaller, and that's really where we get into problems in terms of crop growth. If we don't have that mix, that about 50% soil, 25% void space for air, 25% void space for water, that's when we begin noticing the negative impacts to crop yield. So why is soil compaction more prevalent today than in the past? I don't think there's any question. You look at the size of farm equipment. It's just everybody's trying to be more productive. Everybody's trying to hit those windows, planting windows, harvest windows. We've had challenges, obviously, in the state of Ohio with some of the shifting weather patterns over the last 10 years. And again, there's been some pretty wet springs and some wet autumns in terms of harvest. How does compaction affect productivity? And again, this is some of the work out of Bern University, Thomas Keller's work. But basically, they've been doing a lot of work looking at that void space in the soil, but also looking at root structure. Left-hand side is a non-compacted soil, and you obviously see a deeply rooted corn plant in this case. On the right-hand side, though, we notice a much shallower rooted plant in terms of compacted soils. When we think about access to nutrients, we think about access to moisture during the growing season. Obviously, the plant on the left is going to be a much better position in terms of yield potential at the end of the season. Compaction really can be divided into two categories. There's going to be deep compaction and shallow compaction. And one of the things that I want to get people thinking about is deep compaction is the kind of compaction that's going to take 10 years to mitigate, okay? And I'm talking about generally 18 to about 36 inches or 40 inches deep in the soil. The shallow compaction, we can mitigate with tillage. We can do deep tillage. We can do surface or I'm going to say shallow tillage when we think about some of the tools that we have today. The shallower compaction we can mitigate a little bit easier, and again, because we have access to tillage, but it's that deep compaction that's very concerning. And deep compaction is tied to gross vehicle weights, and I want to stress that and emphasize that. The only way that you're going to avoid deep compaction is reduce the size of the equipment and or only operate on soils that are high strength situations, and really that translates into low soil moistures. In other words, don't be in the field when it's too wet. And I noticed a comment earlier or whatever, and that's a take-home message. There's no question about that. The shallower compaction is really going to be driven by contact pressures between the soil and the tire or track. And so as we go forward, there's a lot of things going on. This one, Matthias, and he was very insistent upon this, we can compact soils within seconds, but it takes literally decades to recover from compaction damage. And that's perhaps one of the biggest take-home messages for me. If we look at what's going on, this is FAO statistics for Northern Europe. They've kind of plateaued in terms of wheat yields. And one of the thoughts in this is right now that a lot of what's going on has to do with the growth environment of the plant. Now, obviously, we can argue the climate situation, but more importantly, the machinery is getting larger, and we're seeing more heavily compacted soils. And so, at least with wheat yields, that rate of gain worldwide is not continuing on that upward trajectory. And we kind of look at that break point in 1990 through 2020, and it's been pretty flat in some respects. And again, I think a lot of that can be attributed to the crop growth environment and specifically the soil. Some of the manifestations of compacted soils, and I think a lot of people recognize this, the wheel tracks are wetter, the soils are more prone to erosion, sheet and rill erosion, and you begin thinking about some of what's going on in the state of Ohio now, and again, because of larger equipment in some respects, there's a price that Ohio farmers are paying for that. Now, I understand the other side of the coin is you got to be timely, and if you're not timely, that's tough too. This goes back to some work we conducted in cooperation with Beck's, London, Ohio, in looking at compaction of grain carts. And this was kind of a worst case scenario. We were looking at tracks versus tires. And if we look at these whisker, box and whisker plots, the gray boxes are what would be the standard yield in an uncompacted condition. The green over here are equalizer tracks, and note we were about 157 bushel an acre on the uncompacted soils and 127 in the areas of the field where we had the equalizer tracks. When we look at regular tracks, we were about 153 on the uncompacted soils, 123 bushel an acre on the tracked areas of the field. And then when we look at wheels over here, we were about 149 bushel per acre. This is corn. Versus 114 for the wheeled tracked event or the wheeled traffic events. So when we look at this, yeah, tracks are better. There's no question about that. But if we think that tracks are going to alleviate or do away with our compaction problems, we're probably mistaken. I want to emphasize this work was done such that the soil was probably in the worst possible condition for the compaction events. We were pretty close to field capacity. I'm going to say this probably would not be uncommon for some wet fall harvest in the state of Ohio. And it's a question of getting the crop out in a timely manner. How can farmers minimize soil compaction? A lot of interest going on here. I know that in the past, Randall Reeder has talked about controlled traffic environments. And I'm a fan of that, but increasingly it's difficult to get these the equipment set up for these traffic patterns. And again, what you're trying to do is minimize the trafficked areas, establish those traffic lanes, and then only operate in those traffic lanes. I put this graphic together just to give people a feel. If you got a four-wheel drive tractor and you have decent set of tires on it, higher horsepower, and then you put a great grain cart behind it, and you're looking at 12-row harvest widths, that machine is going to be trafficking about half of the soil. And so some of the compaction depths too could be as deep as 41 inches. And so again, what I come back to is harvest under appropriate conditions and you can avoid concerns about soil compaction. But again, it's the size of the equipment that's going to drive a lot of